you so much. It's amazing to see so many people. My goodness. Thank you. I want to tell you how I happened to be doing an event like this. Last year, at about the same time, I had a telephone call from Carolyn Freed, who is with the Beverly Hills Theater Guild. And she said, Gloria, I hear you have some really interesting stories. I wonder if you could do us a favor. I said, what is it? And she said, could you do an event for us and tell some of your stories? So I said, well, I'm really flattered, but I'm writing my memoir. And the stories would come from my memoir. And so I think I really would like to wait until the book is published and, see if I can sell books or something, have a book signer. And she said, I understand, yes. And shortly after that, I was at a Valentine's Day party. And I was seated next to the former mayor of Beverly Hills, Donna Elman Garber. Is she here tonight? Yes. Oh, she is. Oh, good. Hope you don't mind if I tell a story about you. And Donna said, what are you doing? And so I told her, and I said I was writing my memoir. And then I saw somebody from the Beverly Hills Theater Guild, and I said, oh, they asked me to do an event, but I want to wait till my book is finished. She said, Gloria, you must do it. At this age, we don't buy green bananas. Well, that changed my mind. Thank you. So I did. And then I was asked to do it tonight, and Theater 40 is my second home, really. So I'm so happy to be here. Before I tell my stories, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about my background. I was born in New York City into a theatrical family. My father, Jimmy Stroock, founded the Brooks Costume Company in New York, and that became the preeminent theatrical costuming company, really, in the United States. And they did the costumes for the major big Broadway shows, the musicals and the period pieces. And my mother, Bianca Stroock, became a theatrical stylist. And what that means is she coordinated and selected and all the clothes, but only contemporary clothes, modern plays. So just for fun, I looked her up the other day. I Googled her the other day, and I was really amazed to find that my mother dressed 15 Broadway shows in 18 years.
Wow.
I know.
Move the mic closer.
This is better? Shall I bring it up? Yeah. This is better? Yeah. Did you hear the last thing about my mom? Just checking. My parents had 2 children. I was the first, the eldest, and I became an actress. And my sister, Geraldine, was 15 months younger than I am. And when she was 19 years old, she also became an actress. And when she was 19 years old, she was under contract to Paramount, and she had changed her name from Geraldine Stroock to Geraldine Brooks. So anyway, that's a little bit of my background. When Jerry and I were really young, our parents went to Europe on a vacation. And the last night of their vacation, they were in Berlin. And they saw a screening of a film called The Blue Angel with a young German actress named Marlene Dietrich. And when it was over, Dietrich was standing and she was throwing violets to the crowd. And my father was talking to the director, von Sternberg, and he said, I think she's terrific. She really ought to come to Hollywood and be in movies. She's just wonderful. And von Sternberg said, well, actually, she is coming. She's just signed a contract with Paramount, and she's leaving tomorrow for New York. She'll be in New York a few months, and then she's going to Hollywood. And she's sailing tomorrow. And my father said, we're sailing for New York tomorrow. What ship is she on? He said, the SS Bremen. Dad said, well, we're on the SS Bremen, too. I'll look her up. So when they got on the ship, my father looked her up, and they ended up becoming really good friends, my mother and father, and Dietrich had all their meals together, and she joined their table, and she and mother would walk around the deck during the day. My father gave her a nickname, Dutchie, from the Deutschland. So that was, so we knew her as Dutchie. And one day, my mother told me this when I was older. One day, she came into her room, and on her bed was a book about lesbian lovemaking. Open to a very, very explicit picture and a bunch of violets. And then there's a knock on the door, and it was Dietrich. And she said, "Well, what do you think, Bianca?" And Mother, no, like, thanks, but no thanks. And she said, "Don't be ridiculous, Bianca. In Europe, you meet people, you like them, you find them attractive, so you make love with them. If they're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter." Well, it mattered to my mother. And when my mother told me the story, I was older, I said, "What did you think?" Mother said, "Tell you the truth, I thought she had a crush on Daddy." And I kind of think she did. When they got to New York, Dietrich opened up a joint checking account with my father as co-signer, and she practically lived at our house. I mean, she didn't live there because she was in a hotel, but she had dinner at our house many, many times during the week, and she told us that she had a little girl named Maria who was exactly my age. And so whatever happened to me, I think she thought was happening to Maria. We were in the park one day, and I fell down and I scraped my knee. And she opened up her purse, and she took out mercurochrome. Really. Gauze, tape, and a scissors. And she took care of it. And she loved to go to the park with us, and she'd fasten our roller skates and so on. Well, my parents were inveterate opening nighters on Broadway. They went to just about every show. And so my father started inviting her, and she said, "Oh, she'd love to go." So Dad would get 3 tickets instead of 2 tickets. And then she asked my father if Brooke's costume could make her something to wear for opening nights. In those days, they dressed for the theater. It wasn't that casual. And my father said yes, but she didn't want to have an evening dress. She wanted to dress like my father. So they made her a tuxedo with a shirt, stiff shirt, a satin cummerbund, a bow tie, and that's how she went to the theater. And one night, I remember so clearly, they'd had dinner at the house, and in those days, the curtain was at 8:30. That was a standard, curtain for opening nights. And my mother was in her bathroom, after dinner, making it up, and Marlene was in our bathroom, my sisters and mine, and she was perched on the edge of the sink. And she took out what looked like a black, thick stick, and she looked at us, and we were in bed, and she said, "Mascara." Spit. Spitting. And she had a brush, and she was making it very creamy, I thought, Mommy doesn't spit in her mascara. She runs the water. Ugh. And then she leaned forward and looked in the mirror, and she starts to put on that mascara, and she's sort of just making her lashes longer and longer, and she's looking in. And then she makes some, rinses it again, stirs it again. And then she beaded her lashes. She would go like, we were just staring at the two of us. And she went over, and she kissed us goodnight, and she read us a bedtime story, and they would leave for the theater, and there was my very handsome father in his tuxedo, and on one arm was my mother, who was very cute and pert and brunette, and Marlene on the other arm. And they would go up. They really looked like something out of Noel Coward's Tonight at 8:30. They did. And I remember Marlene was always talking about her little girl, Maria, her little girl. And I remember once my sister said, and Jerry was just a little kid, she said, if she misses her little girl so much, I don't know why her little girl isn't with her. Well, I think Dietrich had the same idea, because shortly after that, we learned that Maria was coming for about 10 days to visit her mother in New York. The day she arrived, when I came down for breakfast to our kitchen, there was a strange man sitting there. And I didn't know who he was, I didn't know why he was there. And all I can remember is that he liked burnt toast and the sports section of the New York Times. And then when we went to school, we had a Mademoiselle at that time. When we walked to school, Mademoiselle was on this side with us, and this man was walking on the other side, was looking at us. And subsequently, I learned that this was the year after the Lindbergh baby had been kidnapped. And people who were celebrity at all, even a little bit, I think were frightened for their children. And I believe that's what must have happened. And Marlene had decided that she would have a bodyguard, for Maria. And I don't know why my parents had a bodyguard for us, but they did. Maybe they were concerned that because we would be with Maria, something might happen. So there was this man. The day that, or rather the day before, Maria went back to Berlin, my father decided to get theater tickets. And I don't know why he thought a 7 or an 8-year-old should go to the theater, but he did. And we saw a show called Music in the Air. And we were in a box, recall, and in the front were my sister and I, Maria. And then behind us, also in 2 chairs, were the bodyguard and the Mademoiselle, and standing beside them, my father and Dietrich. And my father came forward and he said, honey, we're not going to see the show. I'm taking Marlene or Dutchie, I'm taking her for a drink at Sardi's, but we'll be back in time. And I felt really strange and uncomfortable about the fact that my father, just left. But I turned around just before the curtain went up, just to see if he was still there. And I turned and looked at the back, and no, he and Marlene were gone. But I saw the bodyguard pinching the Mademoiselle. Honestly. And I thought, you shouldn't be doing that. You're supposed to see that nothing happens to us. Pinching. So then Maria left, and the bodyguard left. One day, I came home from school, and I heard music. And I walked into the living room, and Marlene was at the piano. And she was teaching my mother to imitate her. And my mother was sitting cross-legged like this on a chair, with her arms up and a top hat in front of her. And she was singing, falling in love again, never wanted to, what am I to do? I can't help it. Love's always been my game, play it how I may, I was made that way, I can't help it. Men cluster around me like moths around a flame. And if their wings burn, I know I'm not to blame. Falling in love again, never wanted to. What am I to do? I can't help it. And then she popped the hot top hat up. And then Marlene sang, Ich bin von Kopf bis Fuß aus Liebe eingestellt. Und das ist meine Welt. Und sonst gar nicht. Thank you. One day my mom went to see her mother-in-law, my grandma. And when she was leaving, Grandma said, where are you going, Bianca? And Mother said, well, I want to pick up Gloria at dancing school. Remember, I went to Ned Wayburn dancing school. And Marlena wants to come, so I'm picking up Marlena first. And my grandma said, Bianca, people are beginning to talk. They don't know who Marlena likes better, you or Jim. So, then I never thought about her growing up. You know, she was a movie actress. I saw a few of the pictures, but I didn't think about her, didn't spend any time like that. And I grew up, I got married, I had 2 children, moved to California, and my kids were about teens, I think, this time. And my husband, Leonard Stern, said one night, you know, Dietrich is doing a one-woman show at the Doolittle Theater in Hollywood. He said, I'm getting tickets for Saturday night. And Saturday night, we were driving to the theater with our friends Edith and Mel Tolkien. Mel Tolkien was head writer for Sid Caesar, and Edith was an attorney at Paramount. And we were in the car, and so Leonard said, tell them how you know Marlena. So I told them pretty much what I told you. And Edith said, are you going to go backstage? And I said, I don't think so. She said, but why not? I said, you know, it was a long time ago. My father had died in the meantime. I was a little girl. I don't even know if she know me, remember me. I don't think I know that. She said, well, I think you should. Well, I saw the show, and I must say that Dietrich was amazing. She looked like she'd been poured into her dress. It was just molded to her figure. And Burt Bacharach, who was her arranger, had accompanied her at the piano. She was wonderful. And when the show's over, I thought, oh, the heck with it, I'm going to go back. What do I have to lose? So we all went to the backstage. We weren't backstage yet, we were at the stage door. And there were a long line of people, and a man came out and he took everybody's name and went backstage. And then he came out again. He said, ladies and gentlemen, I am so sorry, but Miss Dietrich had 2 shows today. She has 2 shows tomorrow, and she's just not going to be able to see people because she's really very tired. But if Miss Greer Garson and her mother and Miss Stroock and her party would come backstage, she'd like to see them. I guess she remembered it. So Greer Garson went ahead of me. And then when Greer Garson left, we were backstage, I stepped on the stage, and the house lights were all down. There was just one work light on stage. That's all there was. And I looked, I didn't really know where to go, where her dressing room was. And then I looked down right there, and I saw her peeking her head out from behind the curtain. She'd changed into a bathrobe. And she spotted me, and she just went like this. Oh! She put her arms out, and she virtually floated across the stage. She put her arms around me, and she started rocking me in her arms. And she looked at Leonard, and she said, do you know how long I've known this child? This child was in her middle 40s. She said, I used to take her to the park. I used to read her bedtime stories. When her tooth came out, I was the good fairy. She had the exact memory that I had. And when we were driving home, Edith Tolkien said, and you thought she wouldn't remember you? And then I realized, I think maybe for the first time, that when Dietrich first came to the United States, we became her family. Not just friends, but her family. And the heart doesn't forget. Now, what are you playing? Do you recognize what he's playing? Marlon Brando was in it. I wasn't in it. But I was in a play with Marlon Brando. We were in rehearsal for a play called Truck Line Cafe, written by Maxwell Anderson. And the play took place on a diner, really, which was on a truck line. And it was a very good cast. There were about 31 people in it. And one young man who played a soldier who was just coming back from World War II. And he wanted to rent a room in the back. They had cabins in the back. And he was with his wife, and he wanted to rent a room. And his name was Marlon Brando. Now, none of us could understand a word he was saying. We honestly, I don't think I was alone. I don't think anyone thought that he'd ever get to Broadway with it, because he was talking into his shirt, and he was upstaging himself and covering his face, and he was doing, and it was really strange. One day, it was very cold. It was in February. We were in rehearsal in February, and I decided that particular day that I would brown bag my lunch. My parents had a cocktail party the night before, and there were all kinds of goodies and hors d'oeuvres and things like that. So I just, put them in a bag and went to theater. And when Harold Clurman, the director, told everyone to go for lunch, he said, "But Marlon, stay, come here." And so I was seated on a stool, and I could see everything, but I was out of sight. So he said to Marlon, "Marlon, see that table?" And there was an ice cream table. "Pull the table over. And that chair, pull the chair over, sit down. Start the monologue." Now, this monologue was an agonizing monologue. It ran for about 6 minutes, where he confesses to the murder of his wife. And during this anguished encounter, you see that the bartender is calling the police. And then a minute or two later, you hear a car coming in, and 2 young girls come running on stage. I was one. I was listed as girl number 2. and came on stage, and we're jumping, and we're ordering hot dogs and milkshakes and, to go. And Clurman said to Marlon, "Okay, Marlon, start the scene." And Marlon started the scene, and the moment he started to get up, and Clurman said, "Stay. Now go on, come on." And then he continued, and he was like that, and he said, No, stay. All right, come on. And I looked, and I could see that he was wrapping his feet around the base of the table. It was an ice cream table with a very ornate base. He was wrapping his feet. It really looked as though this was an animal in a cage. That's exactly how it looked. And when he was finished, he said, "That's it, Marlon. Don't lose it. Go to lunch." Well, the show did not get good reviews, but Brando did. And I remember it was fun because, well, maybe fun's the wrong word, but anyway, it was interesting because I was one of those 2 girls that came running on, and you thought it was the police coming, but it wasn't the police. They were these 2 girls, and Harold Clurman, all he said to me was, "Gloria, you have to go to the bathroom." So I'm doing this, and jumping and jiggling the whole time. I like an ice cream. He was a wonderful director. I mean, he just, got the actor to use his or her imagination. Now, as I said, we didn't get good reviews except for Brando. And right after that, he went into Candida with Katharine Cornell, who was really most important leading lady in the theater at that time, along with Helen Hayes. And he played Marchbanks to her Candida. And then, following year, I think it was, I was invited by 2 men called the Epstein Twins. They were identical twins, friends of my parents, and they were writers. They had written, among other things, Casablanca. Julie and Phil Epstein. And Julie and Phil invited me to go to Philadelphia to see the out-of-town opening of a play called Streetcar Named Desire. And there was Brian, here he was. And then I went also to the opening night on Broadway. And when he came down the stairs just crying, "Stella, Stella," that's when he became Marlon Brando. Now the next is. I was working in the Little Studio Art Gallery in New York, and it was the only job I've ever had in my life other than as an actor, and I was the assistant manager. And the person who ran the gallery, who owned the gallery, Richard Colmar, was a producer, said to me, "Gloria," he made me the assistant manager, and he said, "Gloria, I don't want you to take any acting jobs while you're working at the Little Studio." I was making $125 a week, but at that time that really wasn't terrible. And I worked from 10 until 6, and I thought it was really a good idea for me to add another string to my bow. And so I said, yes, I'd like to do it. So I was at the Little Studio. I'd been there almost a year, and one day an agent called and said, "I have a job for you." Say that to an actor, you know, a little hard. And what it was is that I was going to be playing the part of a gossip columnist, Gay Gotham, for a show called The Stork Club. Now, the Stork Club at that time was really the most important nightclub in New York City. And so I've said to Mr. Colmar, "I have to leave an hour earlier on Sunday on show day, but may I go and do the show?" And he said, "No. You promised me, I told you that you couldn't take any acting jobs. No, I don't want you to do that." And I said, "But Mr. Colmar, if I don't take lunch and I leave an hour early, I'm still at the same amount of hours at the stuff, and I won't miss any hours. And maybe it isn't so bad. I mean, somebody recognizes you, they see you, and then they see you at the gallery. Maybe that's not so bad." And anyway, I talked him into it. So every show day, I didn't take lunch, and I would leave at 5 instead of at 6, and I'd jump in a cab and I'd go down to 53rd and Madison and go into the Stork Club and take the elevator, and they went up to the 6th floor where CBS had replicated on the top floor the Stork Club. And it was called the Cub Room. That was the big room where all the celebrities went. And so we got there, quickly had our makeup put on, and the maitre d' would go around and ask all the guests. There were many guests. There were singers and comedians. And he would ask everybody what they would like to eat or drink. And he asked me, and I always had the same thing: a club sandwich and coffee. So, all right, now we're doing the show and the dress rehearsal. It opens with Sherman Billingsley, who ran the Stork Club, coming into the Stork Club. That's the song. They played Autumn in New York under his entrance. And then he'd look at everyone, and then he wandered around, and he came over to mine was the first banquette. He came to my banquette, and "Hello, Gay Gotham." They wouldn't use my name. "And who was at the Stork Club this week?" And I'd say, "Oh, Mr. Billingsley, Ernest Hemingway was here, and the Windsors, Duke and Duchess of Windsor, and the Kennedys, and of course Walter Winchell, who's the columnist, had his regular table. Oh, and one other thing, Mr. Billingsley, and this is a little bit of gossip, I guess, but Prince Rainier from Monaco and Grace Kelly are going to announce their engagement on Friday night. And he said, well, that's wonderful, Gay Gotham, thank you so much. And then he'd get up and he'd go to another bunket and talk to them. And if it was a singer, they'd sing a song. I'd been doing the show for a few months. And one day my agent called. He said, Gloria, I just don't know how to say this to you. I'm so uncomfortable, but I have to tell you. I heard Sherman Billingsley said, that Gloria Stroock never says no to food. And I have to tell you, I was this skinny at the time. So
Move the mic closer.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for telling me, I can't tell. So I vowed never, ever, 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 ever would I eat at the Store Club again while I was on the show. So the following week, the maitre d' came over, he asked everyone what they'd like, and he asked me, and I said, no, nothing, thank you. And I said, I'm not hungry. And then we start our rehearsal. Sherman comes in, sits down next to me, next to my moquette, and he said, and who was at the Store Club this week, Gay? And without missing a beat, I leaned underneath and I brought up a brown paper bag and I plunked it on the table. He's looking at me like, oh my God. And I just kept talking about who was at the Store Club that week, and I bit into a corned beef sandwich. I was so angry. And a pickle. And then I did this. He was staring at me. He just couldn't believe what happened. And the following week, when the maitre d' came over, what would you like, Miss Stroock? I said, no, thank you. Nothing, thank you. And he said, oh, well, Mr. Billingsley thought you might like some crepe Suzette. Would you like me to make you crepe? Nothing, thank you. No, thank you. Well, how about caviar on toast points? No, thank you. We have oysters on the half shell. Would you like that? No, thank you. So it gave me a lot of pleasure to do that. When I was working at the little studio, as I said, I was the assistant manager, and the manager was a young man named Lee Nordness. And Lee said to me one day, Gloria, would you do me a favor? And I said, sure, of course. He said, my partner and I have just met Eartha Kitt, and we want to take her to the Store Club. Please join us. We want you to join us Saturday night. Could you make a reservation? And I said, yes. And then I started to think, why didn't he make a reservation? Just pick up the phone. And then I realized why I thought he didn't make a reservation. And that was because I don't ever remember seeing anyone in color at the Store Club. So she was starring in a show at that time called New Faces of 1952. This was 1952. And she was just the talk of New York. She was wonderful. And so I called and I said, hello, this is Gloria Stroock. I'd like 4 tickets for Store Club Saturday night. And one of my guests is Eartha Kitt. E-A-R-T-H-A-K-I-T-T. Yes, Eartha Kitt. I wanted to be sure that they understood, And he said, yes, Miss Stroock, we'll see you on Saturday night. And Sherman had been asking me all the time. He said, Gloria, I want you to come to the Store Club. I really want you to come. But I never did. I used to go before this, but I just didn't. And so we picked up Eartha Kitt, and we drove to the Store Club, and we go into the entry, and I went over to the maitre d', and I said, Stroock, our table, please. He takes out the list. He said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, Miss Stroock. We don't have a reservation. I said, yes, you do. No, I'm sorry, we don't have a reservation. And I said, well, do you have a table? No. I'm so sorry, we are all sold out. And she got it. And she went over and she said, well, I'll just wait. And there was a big banquette in the entry, red leather. And she said, I'll just wait. And she crossed her arms and tossed her, and she sat there. Now, Orson Welles had just called her, and it was in the newspaper, the most exciting woman in the world. And the most exciting woman in the world had to sit outside, just sit and wait, and all these people were coming in. And so many people went over to her, and they asked her for her autograph, and they said they loved her in the show, and didn't matter. We sat there. Finally, they said, oh, we have your table, Miss Stroock, but it wasn't in the cover. It was in the bar, way at the back of the bar, as dark a spot as possible. We had a drink. We were all so uncomfortable, and we left. And I have often thought, what would have happened if I had asked for Sherman Billingsley, who had been asking me to come to the Store Club? But I realized it wouldn't have been any different at all. If he had come, and if he had seen that I was with someone of color, didn't matter who it was, he wouldn't have seated us. There wasn't a single nightclub in New York City at that time, not one, that didn't have that same outrageous credo. If a black person wanted to go to a nightclub at that time, they had to go to Harlem. Daddy, I'm looking at my phone. One day, may have been evening, I don't know. I looked at my very handsome father, and I noticed that his hair was gray, and I honestly had never noticed that before because his hair was a blonde, sort of brownish with blonde in it. And I said, Daddy, when did your hair turn gray? He told me a story. I never thought I would hear a story like this from my dad. But he told me that Brooks was doing the costumes for a musical, and he had gone out of town, and the out-of-town city was New Haven. Most shows opened out of town in New Haven. And he was seated in the audience waiting. It was a dress rehearsal. And they were waiting, and suddenly a man came and tapped him on the shoulder, like that. And my father went out, and the man starts to pat him down. And he said there were 3 men right opposite him with their hats down and their hands in their pocket, and he said it looked like they had guns, all 3. And then this man said, give us the keys to the costume trunks. I don't know how my father had the nerve, but he said, I don't have them. The keys are at the railroad station. The railroad mistress has them. When she gets the final payment for the costumes, she'll give you the keys. And they patted him again, and then they left him. And he went back to the theater and waited for the costumes to come, and they did, and they had the dress rehearsal. The following morning, very early in the morning, my father said there was a knock on his door at the hotel, and a man pushed himself in. He said, Jimmy Stroock, I understand you were roughed up a little bit last night. Dad said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you mean no one bothered you at the theater last night? Dad said, no. So we started. He said, you're a great guy, Jimmy. You're a terrific guy. If you ever need protection, you just call me, Lucky Luciano. Oh, and he left him his calling card. When my father went back home to New York, went to bed that night, the next morning he woke up. His hair was gray. It was. A producer by the name of Larry Schwab came into Brooks' costume one day, and he said to my father, "Jimmy, I was in Austin, Texas this weekend. I heard a girl sing. She is so terrific. I just think she's wonderful. I think she should be on Broadway." So he said, "So Jimmy, I have her picture. I have a record. It was one of these big 78 records." And he said, "And if you hear of anything, do me a favor, think of this kid, will you?" He said, "She's great. Here's her telephone number. Her name is Mary Martin." And he said, "You know everybody, Jim." He said, "Well, sure." So Brooks was doing the costumes for a show called Leave It to Me. It was a musical. Cole Porter had written the score. And there was a song in the show called "My Heart Belongs to Daddy." And the girl who was doing it, and who was very good, broke her ankle. So she couldn't open the show. And so the producer, Vinton Friedley, was auditioning girls to replace her just until, the original girl came back. And my father said, "Vinton, I think we should bring in this girl that Larry Schwab says is so terrific, this Mary Martin girl, and let her audition." He said, "Are you crazy, Jimmy? New York is full of singers. I don't need to go to Austin, Texas to bring a kid in to audition. You're crazy." So my father went to his desk, opened up the drawer, and found the piece of paper with a telephone number on it, and he called her. He said, "Hello, you don't know me. My name is Jimmy Stroock of Brooks Costume Company." He said, "Your friend Larry Schwab thinks you are so terrific that you should be on Broadway." And he said, "And we're doing the costumes for a show called Leave It to Me. I think you should come in and audition. And if that son of a bitch, Vinton Friedley, is too cheap to bring you in, I will." Well, she came in. And the rest, I think, is history. She was bare-legged, sitting up on a wall, and behind her were golf clubs. And she had golf shoes on. And she sang, "While tearing off a game of golf, I may make a play for the caddy. But if I do, I don't follow through, 'cause my heart belongs to Daddy. If I invite a boy some night to dine on my fine Finnan Haddie, why, I'll just adore his asking for more, but my heart belongs to Daddy. Yes, my heart belongs to Daddy. So I simply couldn't be bad. Yes, my heart belongs to Daddy. Dad, 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 yeah. So I wanna warn you, laddie, though I think you're perfectly swell, that my heart belongs to Daddy, because my daddy, he treats it so well." And just then, a much older man in a cashmere coat comes on with a box from Tiffany's, and she runs and she hugs him, and they go out together. Well, overnight, she became, I think I would say, a bankable theater star. And Brooks did all of her costumes from that time on. She never, well, they never went anywhere for costumes other than Brooks when she was doing shows. And they did, forgotten the first one, doesn't matter. And then Peter Pan and South Pacific, Sound of Music, did everything. Many years later, my father had just died. And my mother received a lot of, letters and telegrams and so forth. And there was one letter that was postmarked Brazil. And Mother opened it up, and it was from Mary Martin. And all she said was, "Dear Bianca, from the very beginning, my heart belonged to that Jimmy too." What are you playing?
If I could write a book.
If you ask me. If they asked me, I could write a book. And I am. About the way they talked and whispered and looked. I could write a preface on how we met so that you would never forget. And the simple secret of the plot is just to tell you that I love them a lot. And you will discover, as my book ends, that I've written a memoir about friends. Thank you. Our director, Gail, want to hear more stories? Is that what they said? What did you say? You want to hear more stories?
One more.
One more. Okay. Oh, I'll tell you a story. Otto Preminger. I was in rehearsal for a show that was coming to Broadway, and I've forgotten the title, but the story was, in this family, every girl of 14 years old had a child. So the 28-year-old girl, that was the part I was playing, was going to be a grandmother, because she'd had a daughter, and every 14 years they had a child. Terrible idea. I thought it was awful, but anyway. And it was produced by Lindsay and Krauss, who had just done Life with Father, which was a very big hit. And the play was being directed by a German director. He was also an actor, Otto Preminger. When we first met, first day, we sat around the table and we had what's called a table read, just read the script. And then, I don't know why he decided to first start blocking my scene, which was not at the top of the show, it was somewhere in the middle, but he decided to do that first. So what I have to do was ring the doorbell. There was a package, I had to mime holding package, and I walked into my mother's apartment. So, and I smile and I say my mother, and he stops. "Why are you smiling?" I said, "Well, I'm seeing my mother." It seemed logical to smile. He said, she has a beautiful smile. She knows she has a beautiful smile, so she's smiling." Do it again without the smile. Well, that's hard to do. Try it on me. You're saying hello to your mother, And I later learned that he did this with all the ingenues. I was the youngest in the company. I was the ingenue. That he always picked on the ingenue, the vulnerable person. And one day, during rehearsal, I saw a young woman seated behind, whispering to Mr. Preminger. He was in the theater. And then they're pointing, and they were pointing to me. I was replaced by that young girl, who was replaced by another young girl, who was replaced by another young. There were 5 actresses. One was Grace Kelly. 5 actresses that were in that part. He just kept firing them. And the show never opened in New York. And I'll bet that Otto Preminger wasn't smiling. The book isn't out yet, but I just did want to tell you that. I mean, I'm on my second draft, and it'll be hopefully, soon between covers. It's called Cast of Characters, and you've met a few of them today. Thank you.